Now, let's stay with that story because many South Africans are eagerly anticipating the opportunity to utilize that two-pot retirement system. Despite extensive discussions and explanations, people are still seeking clarity and advice on this. In less than 2 weeks, retirement funds across the country will implement this two-pot system. And so to get a better sense of what we should be thinking about, let's bring in our next guest. Michelle Acton is responsible for customer value proposition at Old Mutual Corporate and joins us now via our video link. Michelle, it's great to see you. Thanks very much indeed for making time to speak to us here on the SABC News channel. And I'll be the first to admit that even I don't really have the most crystal clear understanding of how this two-pot retirement system actually works. But the 1st of September is the big date everybody is looking forward to. Technically speaking, in as simple a way as possible, what happens comes the 1st?
Sure, that's a great question, and good morning. Thank you for having me. I think just so everybody understands, there's this focus on the 1st of September. But what happens on the 1st of September is the legislation changes. So this new two-pot regime is coming into effect. And essentially what we'll be doing is needing to balance an old system, how it used to work, with how the new system needs to work. So the effective date of these changes is 1 September. But as mentioned in the earlier broadcast, that means from the 1st of September, retirement funds have quite a bit to do to make sure they're aligned and ready for this new change, because it kind of ticks over from the 31st of August over to the 1st of September, and it's not like just on the tick of a second mark, all of it's done. So I think realistically, for a lot of members, there's a lot of focus with this new two-pot system and this idea of being able to access money. But administrators and retirement funds need to ensure that they're affecting it, so they bring in the required system changes that need to happen. And then they allocate the right money, which we can talk about just now in terms of amounts and what that actually looks like, before members will be in a position to come forward and claim. So the 1st is a Sunday. And I always smile because everyone talks about wanting to get their money on the 1st. But I think realistically and practically, there's a lot of steps that are going to need to be followed before members will be able to actually see money in their bank account following the 1st of September.
Fair enough. All right. In my mind, this will be different for each fund. But what's your kind of estimate around when people will finally be able to have that cash in their account? And we'll speak about those amounts in just a short while. But if people are trying to plan for this in anticipation, around when should they look at possibly having access to that money?
So again, like you mentioned, I think it is fund and administrator specific, depending on how their systems currently work and what needs to change. But let's just discuss the steps that need to happen. It'll help put it in perspective. So the first thing, that after they've loaded their new systems, enabling this old world and new world into the same system, there will need to be a transfer from existing savings into the savings pot that member will be able to access. Then they will have to be able to initiate the claim and include validating that member. Then they will need to be able to do tax directives with SARS, because remember, every payment comes with a tax directive, so that's very dependent on SARS. They'll need to disinvest the money and then ultimately pay it to the member. So I think realistically, in most cases, members shouldn't be expecting to see money in their bank accounts until practically October for a lot of funds. It could be even later than that for many others. So I think realistically, I've said to many people, when September comes, you almost need to step back and just patiently wait for all the other system changes to go and have into place before you start trying to come through and claim money. Because even when you submit your claim, there's a lot of steps that'll need to go through before you'll actually receive it. So I think practically you'll be looking at October.
All right, we're still together, so we're making great progress, Michelle. All right, my next question is, a lot of people, of course, have also been having conversations around how much they can take. And part of what the legislation does is actually put a cap on this, right?
Yeah, so I think if I can just take a step back and just have an understand in terms of what this looks like, in terms of what the two-pot system's trying to do. So they call it the two-pot system, but everyone's actually going to have 3 pots, which adds confusion to this. And I think the first element for people to remember is everybody will have an amount they've already got saved in the fund as at the 1st of September, right? So if you've been a member of a retirement fund and you've been contributing, then let's say, for example, you've saved 200,000 in your fund already. So the first thing that's important to note is whatever you've saved in your fund as at that 1st of September, let's use the example of 200,000 Rand, that gets allocated to what we're affectionately calling the vested part. And what that's trying to do is saying all old rules. So current rules of retirement system, how it works, access rules, withdrawal are exactly the same for that piece of money, that 200,000 Rand. Then the new rules come into play 1st of September, and this concept of the two parts only starts from the 1st of September forward. So you'll then have the savings part and this retirement part, which will be for future contributions after the 1st of September. So whatever money you pay into the fund after the 1st of September, a third will go into your savings pot, 2/3 will go into your what we're calling your retirement pot. Now, the access piece of how much people will be able to access is what's going to be in their savings pot. Because in the system going forward, the concept is this savings pot, which will have a third of your future contributions, will essentially become your emergency savings fund that you can access without having to resign if you need to, but maximum once per year. Now, in terms of what you can access to kickstart the system, if I can use that word, and to enable members not to start with a savings pot balance of 0,
right,
but rather start with something, that is where they're talking about 10% of your existing savings capped at 30,000, transferred out of that vested piece, so your existing savings, into that savings pot as an opening balance. So if we use the 200,000 example, it means that 10% of that, which would be 20,000 Rand, would then move out of your vested as an opening balance in your savings pot. And so that, if you though have R1 million in your vested pot, because you've saved R1 million so far, then 10% capped at 30,000 is transferred, so you'll only have 30,000 transferred across. So that's the first thing to remember, is it's 10% capped at 30,000 that'll be transferred as an opening balance into your savings pot. Now, once that transfer's happened, which is part of the work I mentioned earlier, that administrators need to be able to do this, calculate it, make sure it's all sitting in the right place, then members can then make a call. They don't have to come claim it immediately, because it's not a use it or lose it concept.
Right.
The idea is that savings pot then becomes your emergency savings, and it's got a kick-started balance in there. And then at the end of September, contributions come in and you add more to your savings pot, and over time that will build up. If you then need to access it, you can then come forward and access, and then whatever's in that savings pot, so the initial balance of say 20,000 plus all your contributions for a while till you claim, you can take all of it if you like. That's in that savings pot, if that makes sense. So there's no cap to how much you can take out of your savings pot. The cap is around what is initially transferred into the savings pot.
Sure. I can't wait to break this down to some of my friends, because I finally have got it. Michelle Acton, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. It's an incredibly important story, especially when you consider the implications.